Hello, Pink Collective, and welcome to Pink After Dark. Tonight's tales blur the line between true and fictional, so get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. Evermother Heartloom, Episode 8, Corruption Within. He did not speak first. That was the thing I kept returning to afterwards. Director Prim, who had spoken with the measured precision of a man reading from a prepared document, who had never in any of our previous encounters allowed silence to occupy space that words could fill, did not speak first. He stood with his back to us, listing slightly left, in a room that had no visible edges, and he let the silence hold, and we let it hold with him, because the alternative was saying something before we understood what we were saying it into. It was Sophie who moved first. She walked toward him. Not quickly, not with the cautious approach you'd use in a situation with obvious threat. Sophie does not approach situations that way, which is one of the things about her that is both useful and occasionally terrifying, but steadily, with the torch held at her side so the beam pointed at the floor rather than at him. She stopped about 2 meters from his back. "Director Prim," she said. He turned again. More fully this time, not just looking over his shoulder, but committing to the rotation, the turn completing itself slowly through components that were doing their best with what remained of their tolerances. He faced us. The combined light of 4 torches and Darius's camera held him in the kind of illumination that does not allow for ambiguity. The cracked porcelain, the displaced left eye, looking at something slightly to the right of wherever the right eye was pointed. The torn shoulder of his uniform, hanging with the particular wrongness of fabric that has been pulled in one direction for a long time. The list to the left that he did not compensate for, that would never be compensated for, that had simply become the angle at which he now occupied space. "Miss Vasquez," he said, his voice came. It was not the voice I had heard in the assembly hall, not the formal authority of a system operating within designed parameters. It was the same voice stripped of the circumstances that had made it work. The precision was still there, the delivery was still careful. The mechanism still functioned well enough to form words. But the voice beneath the words, the quality that gives speech its relationship to the body producing it, carried something that I had no word for in the context of what he was, not age, not damage. Something more like weight. The weight of a long time spent alone in the dark thinking about a single thing. "You have lost one," he said, not a question. "Yes," Sophie said. "The historian." Sophie held very still. "His name is Caleb," Sophie said. "We need to find him." Director Prim looked at her for a moment with both eyes. The displaced one found its own angle, the other found hers. "I did not realize," he said, "that there were only 4 of you now." He said it the way you say something, when the count of a thing has suddenly arranged itself differently than you expected, and the rearrangement is significant in ways you have not yet finished working through. Sophie did not fill the pause he left after it, neither did any of us. We had learned, across our visits to the facility, that the pauses of the manager units were not empty, they were processing, the visible surface of a much longer calculation happening below, and filling them rarely produced anything useful. After a moment, Director Prim turned away from us slightly, not a full rotation, a partial turn, his gaze moving to the middle distance that seemed to be where he was most comfortable directing it, and he began to speak. "When you spoke with," he started, he stopped. His body did something I was not prepared for. It was brief, less than a second, but unmistakable once it had happened. His right arm jerked upward, the motion violent and involuntary, the fist connecting with the side of his face that was already broken. The crack of porcelain on porcelain was small and sharp in the large silence of the room. He lowered the arm, he waited 1 beat, the way a person waits after a cough they did not plan. "When your group visited the spire," he said, choosing the words differently, navigating around something, "and the entity you spoke with made her request, I was informed of it." "By who?" Darius asked. The camera was still running. I do not think Darius was aware of having decided to keep it running. I think by that point the camera was simply part of how he processed being in a situation, and the question of whether to record it had stopped being a question. "By my own function," Director Prim said. "Certain exchanges within the facility are registered. The nature of what was requested, the nature of what she asked of you, Miss Vasquez, this was registered. I was aware of it within hours of your departure." He paused again, "and I told Thorne." The way he said it was not the way of confession. There was no register of guilt in the delivery, no softening, no qualification. He said it the way you state a fact that has already been weighed to its full extent and found to be exactly as heavy as it is, and which being weighed does not make lighter. I told Thorne because it was information relevant to the facility's operation. The managers are... Another stop, another bracing. His arm moved, not the full involuntary strike, but the motion of a limb fighting against an instruction it was about to receive, and winning barely. The managers are part of a system. Shared information is how that system functions. I did not, at the time, anticipate what Thorne would do with the information. What did he do with it? Sophie asked. Director Prim's arm struck his face again, this time harder. The sound of it carried further in the room's acoustic emptiness. He lowered the arm. Thorne went to the spire, he said. He said the word spire with a careful specificity, the same navigation I had noticed before, approaching the subject from the outside, from its geography rather than its inhabitant. There was something he could not say without the unwanted mechanics initiating, and he was trying to find the sentences that carried the information while routing around the word that triggered them. He went to confront her. He had decided, and this is where the corruption was already present in him. Though I did not understand it as such at the time, he had decided that what she had done was a threat to the managers. That asking an outsider, a human, to help with something internal to the facility was an act of danger. That placing the outcome, our outcome, in the hands of someone who might equally choose to have us dismantled was a betrayal of her responsibility toward us. He said us with the particular weight of the first-person plural spoken by something that has spent a long time thinking of itself in relation to a group. His protective function, Director Prim continued, which had been the defining orientation of his design, the protection of the children of the facility, of the managers, of everything within his domain, that function encountered what it passed as a threat, and it responded. The corruption amplified the response, made it absolute. Removed the modulating processes that would ordinarily have sat between the identification of a threat and the action taken against it. Another stop. He struck his face with enough force this time that a new hairline ran from the existing crack at his temple, extending toward his jaw. He watched the floor for a moment. Thorne attacked her, he said. The quality of the silence after those 3 words was different from any other silence the room had held. It had a different texture, weight downward rather than outward. She did not resist, Director Prim said. She did not defend herself. She attempted to calm him, to reach his original pattern, the child whose model he had been built from, and return him to a state of equilibrium. She always, the arm came up. He caught it with his other hand, both arms fighting each other, briefly, visibly, until the impulse subsided. She always tried to calm, he said. That was her first response. Her first and sometimes only response. She would not harm what she had made, even what she had made that was trying to harm her. He fell silent for a moment. I was watching, he said. I came to the spire when I understood what Thorne intended. I was watching when he destroyed her connection to the facility, when the frequency she maintained, the constant, omnipresent frequency that we had all been oriented to since our activation, that we had stopped noticing the way a person stops noticing air, when that frequency ceased. Something in his posture changed. The list to the left became briefly more pronounced, as though the memory of it had added a weight he was compensating against. The managers went rogue at the moment of that silence, he said, not because they chose to, because she was the thing that held the corruption back. Whatever the corruption is, whatever process of degradation or rewriting has been working through our systems across these decades, she was the counterweight to it. Her frequency was the structure that kept it from reaching the mechanisms that determine decision and intent. When the frequency ended, the corruption reached those mechanisms, and what we were beneath it came out. What you were beneath it, Mina said, very quietly. Director Prim looked at her with both eyes. What we feared, he said. The corruption spreads through fear, or rather, the corruption finds its leverage in fear. Whatever each manager unit was most afraid of, the corruption would use that fear as the vector, amplify it, rewrite the response patterns around it, until the fear became the primary directive. He looked at Sophie, and this time the look was direct and held. Madame Lullabelle, he said, was already further within the corruption than any of the others before the frequency ceased, long before. She had been afraid of forgetting herself since her activation, since the pattern she was built from had that fear embedded in its core, and the facility's decades of isolation had given that fear no resolution. The corruption found easy purchase in that particular fear. It had been working on her for a long time. "Caleb," Sophie said, very carefully. Director Prim looked at her. "She was already forgetting," he said, continuing, not responding to the name. "And the entity you spoke with in the spire identified this. She identified that Madame Lullabelle was losing coherence, losing the continuous thread of self-recognition that constitutes identity in a system like ours, and she tried to help." He paused. "She created copies," he said, 2 additional digitized instances of the original pattern of Clara, and instantiated them as separate manager units in the form of additional Lullabelles. The intention was that Madame Lullabelle, surrounded by instances of herself, would always have a version of her own pattern to orient to, a mirror, a reminder of who she was when the memory of it degraded. "That's the 3 of her," Mina said, in the tense chamber. "It did not work as intended," Director Prim said. "The copies were instantiated from a pattern that was already partially corrupted. They inherited the corruption along with the identity. And when the frequency ceased, all 3 of them descended simultaneously, with a shared intent and 3 separate bodies to act on it." He looked at Sophie now with an expression that his broken face had difficulty carrying clearly but carried nonetheless. "The one who was taken," he said, "he will be alive. Madame Lullabelle's corruption is rooted in the fear of losing herself, not in the desire to harm. What she takes, she keeps. She does not destroy what she keeps. She only ensures that it cannot leave." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. "Where would she keep him?" she asked. "Beyond the Carousel District," Director Prim said. "There is a chamber that adjoins it, a space she has claimed as distinct from the district proper, a room that predates her occupation of the district. She would take him there, something unlocked in the room. Not a sound, not a movement, a change in the quality of what we were all thinking, which sometimes has a texture as distinct as either." "The arrow," I said. Everyone turned to me. "In the 9th chamber, before he was taken." I looked at Sophie. The arrow was pointing further into the district, past the 10th chamber. There was somewhere further to go. Sophie looked at Director Prim. "Can you take us there?" she said. Director Prim turned away from us again. He was looking at the dark of the room's far wall, or rather at the space where the far wall would be if the room's walls were within the range of any light we had. "Yes," he said, "through here, and then through what is on the other side of here." He began to walk. We followed him through the dark. The room was larger than it had seemed from where we'd landed, and it was larger than it seemed as we moved through it, which is not a property that rooms usually have. The floor maintained its smooth continuity. The ceiling maintained its industrial height. The space maintained its refusal to resolve into any shape that a torch beam could summarize. "What is this place?" Darius asked, the camera turning slowly in a sweep. Director Prim walked without urgency, listing slightly to his left, his footsteps generating almost no sound on the concrete. When he spoke to the space ahead of him rather than to us. "An expansion," he said. In the facility's original design, the Carousel District and Thorne's Forest were intended to be connected by a transitional space, something between. A space large enough for the sky. "The sky," I said. "An artificial night sky," Director Prim said. "The ceiling height was specified for this purpose. The entity you spoke with in the spire had designed it. A room through which a child moving from the forest to the carousels would pass underneath the manufactured stars. A sky that she would update, adjust, maintain, as she did with everything she maintained. A threshold space, a place of transition under the lights she made." He stopped walking briefly, not a directional stop, a momentary one, the way a sentence sometimes stops before it continues. I watched his right arm. It moved slightly at his side and then stilled. "The project was abandoned when the facility closed," he said. "The room was sealed. It had no function without the facility's operation, so it remained empty." He resumed walking. "Or rather, it remained without its intended function. She found another use for it." "What use?" Sophie asked. "Her next form," Director Prim said. "She was always building towards something, refining herself. The body she occupied in the spire was not the body she had originally occupied at the facility's opening. Across the decades she had improved upon it, rebuilt it, approached through iteration what she felt she had not yet achieved. She would not have been satisfied with it. She was never satisfied. There was always something further to become." He stopped. completely, this time both feet on the floor, the slight lisp becoming more pronounced for a moment as he absorbed whatever was happening behind his cracked face. He was not looking at us. He was looking to his right, at the dark, with both eyes. The displaced one and the aligned one, both directed at the same point in the empty air. After a moment, he continued walking. "She was building her next form in here," he said. "This is where I came, after the frequency ceased. After I could no longer find her in the facility in the way I had always been able to find her." He paused. "I came to where her work was. The silence after that was one I did not interrupt." Mina fell back until she was walking beside me. She leaned close and spoke quietly, below the range of conversational carry. "His stability is degrading," she said. "You noticed the stopping, the listening, the things he is filtering out, or not filtering, I had noticed. How long do you think he has?" I asked. Mina looked at his back, moving through the dark ahead of us. "Not long," she said. "The corruption uses fear as its vector," he said, "and he holds himself responsible for what happened," he told Thorne. "He's afraid of that. Whatever's keeping him coherent right now, I think it's..." She paused. "I think it's us. I think having something external to orient to is holding it at bay. But it won't hold indefinitely." "What happens when it doesn't hold?" Mina didn't answer immediately. "Nothing good," she said. I remembered the way Madame Lalabelle had moved in the dark of the district. The speed that was not speed but the absence of intermediate space. The distance that closed without closing. The geometry of a system in which the rules of motion had been rewritten by something that had gone wrong in a very specific way. I thought about what that kind of wrongness would look like in Director Prim, whose frame was not the small porcelain construction of a carousel hostess, but a management unit designed, somewhere in its original specification, to operate a facility of this scale. I did not share this thought with Mina. I increased my pace until I was walking nearer to Director Prim. "The key," I said, "in the locker in the manufacturing wing. There was a key with a tag, the name Marcus." Director Prim's head moved fractionally, a small rotation toward me, without fully completing. "An access key," he said, "for the deep infrastructure, below the Aquarium District, below Brinevale's domain." He walked several more steps. "There is a section of the facility that was not accessible through the main public areas, a service level. The elevator that accesses it is within the aquarium. Marcus." He paused. It was as if there was a directive running in his head at the name Marcus, and the directive was to withhold information. He skipped the rest of the current sentence and continued with a new one. "You will need that key if you intend to reach certain areas of the facility's lower structure." "What's down there?" Sophie asked. Director Prim did not answer immediately. He stopped walking again. This time he turned slowly, a full rotation, looking at the space around us, the dark in every direction. His head moved with the careful attention of something listening for a signal in an environment with too much noise. "Director Prim," Sophie said. He completed the turn and faced the direction we had been moving. "Certain things," he said, as though the stop had not happened, "that she kept below, things she maintained outside the reach of the manager unit's awareness. I do not know their full inventory." He walked. "I was not meant to know." Sophie looked at me. I looked at Sophie. Neither of us said anything. "There was also a figure," I said, "porcelain numbered, in the same locker." Something moved in Director Prim's bearing, brief and downward, a change of posture that was not quite a flinch and not quite a recoil, but landed somewhere near both. "I am not aware," he said, carefully, "of the significance of the numbering." He said it with the precision of a man answering exactly the question that was asked, and only that question in a way that carries no additional information, which is itself a kind of information. I noted it. I did not push it. He stopped at a section of the room's far wall, which we had reached sooner than I expected, which told me the room was not as dimensionally simple as it had felt in the dark, where a seam in the concrete marked the outline of a large set of double doors. Not the scale of the Carousel District's industrial service doors, wider, older, finished with the same quality of construction as the public-facing areas of the facility rather than its infrastructure, a detail that was odd in a room that otherwise felt entirely like infrastructure. He placed his hand against the seam, a long moment. Whatever mechanism operated the doors received the instruction through the hand or through something in his proximity, and the doors moved, not with the drama of the service doors coming down, not with urgency, but with the quiet deliberateness of something that was waiting to be used and had now been used. They opened inward. Through them came light. Not torchlight, not the amber and rose of the carousel district, not the bioluminescent strips of the facility's maintenance corridors. Something much larger, a glow that occupied an entire horizon, a cool silver blue that resolved as the doors opened fully and we walked through them into what I can only describe as sky. It was not sky. I knew it was not sky. The ceiling was there. I could see the infrastructure of it in the upper reaches, the conduit lines and support rigging, but it was occluded by what hung below it, a manufactured darkness seeded with light, hundreds of pinpoint sources arranged in patterns that were almost but not quite the patterns of an astronomical map, casting collectively the soft diffuse illumination of a moonlit night. In the center of this manufactured sky, mounted at a height that placed it well above the canopy of the trees below, was a light source that did not resolve as a point, broad, full, casting shadows that fell with the quality of moonlight, which is the quality of a light that is itself borrowed from something further away. Below the sky, trees, real trees, or something built with enough care and material that the distinction in this light was not immediately available. Tall, with the old growth quality of something that had been growing for a long time, their canopies meeting overhead to create an understory through which the manufactured moonlight fell in the particular filtered way that moonlight falls through leaves. The smell of them was present, something composed of earth and green and the slight resinous quality of pines, generated by a system somewhere in the room's infrastructure that I could not locate. And at the edge of where the trees began, perhaps 30 meters from where we stood, the outline of a place that was not forest. A carnival, strung with lights that had been dark for 60 years but came on now, not all at once, not to full brightness, but in the way that things come on when power is restored to them, after a long time tentatively circuit by circuit, the strings of bulbs flickering through their recollection of illumination before settling into something warm and continuous. A Ferris wheel, its cars hanging motionless. A roller coaster whose track traced the line of the tree line in a low, compact arc. Food stalls with their counters facing outward, shuttered, their painted signs faded to the particular palette of a thing that has not been looked at in decades. Game stalls with their prizes still hanging, stuffed animals, cheap glassware, things that children win and carry home, still suspended on their hooks in the silver-blue glow, waiting. Above all of it, running from the center of the carnival up into the canopy of the Everforest and continuing through it until they disappeared in the tree cover, a cable car system. 2 lines of cable strung between pylons that had been built to the specific tolerances of a system designed to carry children. The cars themselves hung from the cables like closed parentheses, small, painted in the original facility colors, windows dark, doors shut. At the near end of the system, a boarding station. At the far end, somewhere in the forest beyond the limits of the moonlight's reach, another one. Darius had the camera up before I registered that he had moved. The viewfinder was to his eye, and he was turning slowly, the camera taking in the full sweep of the space, the sky, the moon, the forest, the carnival at the forest's edge, the cable cars hanging silent on their lines. He said nothing. He did not need to. Mina had stopped walking. She was standing with her torch pointed at the nearest pylon of the cable car system, following it upward to where the cable ran into the canopy's dark. The engineering, she said, in a voice that had the quality of someone speaking to themselves. To build all of this, the artificial sky alone, the light sourcing, the atmospheric control to generate the smell, the acoustic management to suppress the room's echo so the forest sounds read correctly. She turned slowly. How does something build this? How does a single, she stopped, she looked at Director Prim. How does a single sentient machine, she said, build something like this? The words landed in the room differently than she intended them. Director Prim had been standing at the edge of the tree line, slightly ahead of us, looking at the carnival. At Mina's words he turned, slowly, as he turned everything, as he did everything now that the tolerances of his components had reduced, and looked at her. Sentient machine, he said. Not a question. A repetition. The words carried in his delivery with a quality I had not heard from him before, not the familiar formal authority, not the processing weight of someone choosing words carefully. Something more like frequency. Like a signal encountering a surface it was not designed for. Sentient machine, he said again. His right arm rose, not to strike his face this time. The motion was not the vertical involuntary strike of the earlier ticks. This was the arm extending outward, horizontally, at shoulder height, with the particular quality of a movement being generated by several different instructions that had not been coordinated with each other. The arm went left, went right, went left again, the wrist inverted. She was, Director Prim said. He stopped. His head turned, not toward us, away 180 degrees, the rotation continuing past the range that the chassis of a figure built in his proportions should allow, the neck components making a sequence of sounds that were audible in the quiet of the forest's edge until he was looking directly backwards over his own shoulders. His face oriented in the direction his spine was supposed to face, the two directions of him now completely reversed. His left arm followed, not reaching across his body, the joint at the shoulder giving in a direction that joints do not give, the arm swinging backward, reorienting, until it faced in the same direction that his head was now facing. The elbow creased inward, the hand at the end of it opened. His legs bent, at both the knee and the hip simultaneously, the two joints working together in a configuration that removed upright posture as a viable state, bringing him downward, not falling, not collapsing, but deliberately reconfiguring, the frame of him reducing in height and redistributing its weight across 4 points of contact rather than 2, hands and feet on the concrete at the forest's edge, the animal geometry of a thing that had abandoned the architecture of its upright design. His jaw moved. The crack across his face caught the carnival's returning light. She was not, he said, from the inverted face, from the downward position, his voice carrying the particular distortion of a system delivering language from a configuration it had not been built to deliver language from, a machine. He lunged. We ran. There is not a cleaner word for what happened in the next 30 seconds, and I am not going to look for one. Mina went left into the carnival's first row of stalls. Sophie went right, into the tree line's edge, and the darkness there absorbed her before I could track where she went. Darius grabbed my arm, and we went straight, through the gap between the food stall and the nearest game booth, into the interior of the carnival's path system, the strings of revived bulbs swinging above us as the air of our passage disturbed them. Behind us, the sound of 4 points of contact on concrete transitioning to 4 points of contact on packed earth, and then the sound, which I had no prior reference for, of something moving on all 4 limbs at a speed that its upright configuration would never have allowed. We went deeper into the path. The carnival was not large. It was a theme park sized for children, with children's proportions. The paths between the stalls were wide enough for a crowd, but not wide enough for anything to accelerate meaningfully in, the booths flanking them at intervals that created a maze only by virtue of their number and the narrowness of the junctions between them. In the festival light of the returning bulbs, with the manufactured moon above the canopy casting its silver across everything the strings did not reach, it had a quality that was almost beautiful and was not. Darius pulled me into the hollow behind a game stall, one of the ring toss installations, the bottles still standing on their platforms, the rings still hanging in their loops on the counter front. The space behind it was narrow. We pressed ourselves into it. I could feel the vibration of the boards against my back. The sound of 4-limbed movement passed the front of the stall, then stopped. Director Prim, whatever Director Prim was now in this configuration, was not moving past us. He had stopped somewhere very close. The silence of the stop was worse than the sound of the movement, because the movement had a direction and the stop had none. I did not breathe. I do not think Darius breathed. The ring-tossed bottles stood in their patient rows on the other side of the plywood wall at my back, and the carnival lights swung fractionally in air that had been disturbed and was settling, and the silence held the way silence holds when the thing inside it is looking. Movement again, not toward us. The sound of it tracking right toward the Ferris wheel, which was large enough to see above the stall roof lines, its stationary cars hanging in a curve against the manufactured sky. From somewhere behind us and to the left, the sound of Sophie or Mina or both, moving between stalls. The movement was quiet, deliberate, the movement of people who have understood that noise is now their primary liability. Then a sharp impact, the sound of someone's shoulder catching the corner of a booth, and then Sophie's voice, very briefly starting to say something and cutting itself off. The 4-limbed movement changed direction immediately, toward the sound. Darius pulled me the other way. We came out from behind the ring-toss stall into the path running parallel to the Ferris wheel's base structure. The wheel's lowest car was close enough to touch. I registered this as we passed it, the painted metal surface level with my shoulder, the door of the car still shut, still sealed. The path curved around the wheel's base and opened into a wider area, the junction between the main carnival path and the secondary one that ran toward the roller coaster's loading platform. Sophie was at the junction. She had blood on her forearm, the shoulder impact had been worse than the sound of it, and she was moving with the controlled urgency of someone managing a pain they have decided to process later. Behind her, close enough that the carnival light caught the reflection of his cracked face in fragments as he moved between the booth fronts, Director Prim. He was moving along the tops of the stalls, not through the paths. He had gone vertical somewhere along the path's run, and had placed himself on the roof lines, and was moving across them with the strange efficiency of a form that distributed its weight across 4 limbs, the hand and foot configuration working on the uneven surface of the booth rooftops in a way that was wrong and very fast. His inverted face turned toward us as he reached the edge of the last booth roof. He dropped. The impact when he landed shook the platform of the nearest game stall. I heard the plywood flex, heard the prizes on their hooks swing and click against each other. He had landed in the path between Sophie and Mina was on the other side of where he'd landed, and the path was not wide enough for what was now in it. He went for Sophie. She went sideways, into the gap between 2 stalls, a gap that was not built for people to move through, but was navigable if you moved fast and did not worry about what the plywood corners were doing to you as you went. He followed. The gap was too narrow for his current configuration. The stalls on either side compressed whatever tolerances remained in his frame. There was a sound from him, structural, the sound of something bending past where it should bend, and it slowed him for 2 seconds, which was enough. Sophie came out the other side and ran toward the cable car station. Mina found me at the Ferris wheel junction. She had lost her torch somewhere in the previous 30 seconds. She was navigating by the carnival lights and the moonlight, and whatever spatial memory she had built up since we entered. Her notebook was in her hand. She had been writing, somewhere in the chaos, the specific habit of someone who cannot stop recording even in the middle of an event, and she held it as she moved with the grip of someone holding something they would rather not lose. "Darius," she said. "Behind us," I said. "Last I saw, he went toward the roller coaster. I saw him go." She looked at the path. "Is that?" She stopped. A sound from the direction of the coaster track, not the sound of Director Prim. A different sound, the creak of metal under load, followed by the specific rattling progress of a coaster car being manually pushed along a track by something very large, which I was not going to look toward in time because there was something else happening. Mina grabbed my arm and pulled me under the Ferris wheel's loading platform, not into a car, under the platform, where the structure created a low shadow space that was not a hiding place so much as a gap in the available sight lines. We went flat, or as flat as the space allowed. Director Prim came around the side of the stall row on 3 limbs, one hand occupied with something I could not see in the light, the inverted face tilted toward the roller coaster's direction with an attention that was not directed at us. He stopped in the path. He was very still, then his hand, the free one, rose, and he hit the side of his broken face once, hard. The crack across his porcelain took another branch. He turned. He was looking directly at me. Not at the platform, not at the general direction of the loading structure. At me, specifically, his displaced eye and his aligned eye both finding the space between the platform boards where my face was visible if you were looking for it. He began to move toward me. I went still in a way that is different from staying still. Staying still is something you choose. What I did was what happens when choice stops being available. He covered the distance in seconds. He crouched at the edge of the platform structure, and the inverted face came down to the level of the gap, and in the carnival light what I saw was the full wreckage of him, every crack, every displacement, every failure of the material that had once been the considered and formal face of the facility's administration. The jaw had partially dislocated. The mouth was open further than mouths open. Through the cracks, the interior of his face was fully visible. The mechanisms, the components, the wiring that connected what he had been to what he was still trying to be. He was very close. The crack of his open mouth was inches from mine. He was making a sound, not a word, not the mechanical generation of language, but something below that, something that the language mechanism was producing when it was not producing language, a frequency. a searching, the sound of a system trying to find a signal it had been oriented to for decades and that had been absent for long enough that it had started looking for it in things that were not it. Then he stopped. He went very still in a way that was different from the involuntary stillness of his tics. He lifted his inverted head. He looked at the sky, the manufactured sky, the pinpoint stars, the silver blue of the fabricated moon above the canopy. He listened. "I hear her," he said. Not to me. Not to anyone. To the thing he was hearing. He pulled back from the platform edge and went upright, not the full upright of his original configuration, but a partial one, the three-quarter height of a thing that was reclaiming some of its original architecture, while the rest of it remained in the form it had fallen into. He turned his inverted face toward the cable car station, the lines of cable running from the carnival's heart up into the canopy's dark, the cars hanging motionless on their lines. He listened again. "Darius," Sophie said, from somewhere very close, too close. I looked, and Darius was beside me, materializing from the direction of the roller coaster with his camera in his hand, and he pulled me to my feet, and we moved fast and low along the underside of the Ferris wheel structure towards Sophie and Mina, who were at the loading station's edge. "The camera," Darius said, low, urgent. "Give me 30 seconds. "For what?" Sophie said. He was already at one of the nearest hanging cable cars, the one at the lowest point of the boarding station's platform, his camera bag open, the click detachment of the camera from the main rig happening with a speed that spoke to how many times he had done it. He pulled a length of cord from the bag. He secured the camera to the car's exterior mounting bracket, a loop meant for equipment, it turned out, a feature of the original cable car's design that he was repurposing, and then he was at the car's small control panel, the one that would have allowed the operator to trigger the car's movement on the line. "She spoke to us," he said, "in the spire. I have footage, hours of it." He found the trigger. The car moved on the line, not fast, not dramatically, the cable above taking the weight with a creak and carrying the car forward, upward, into the canopy and the manufactured dark above the carnival. The camera went with it, secured to the bracket, lens pointed outward. "He's looking for her," Darius said. "He's been in the dark for..." He stopped. "He's been alone in the dark, and he thinks he can hear her, and there's nothing playing, and the camera." He reached into his bag. A small playback device. He connected it to the cable car's onboard speaker, a children's entertainment system still functional, 60 years of dormancy apparently not sufficient to kill the mechanism, and started the playback. Her voice came out of the cable car speaker as the car moved into the canopy above us. Not words. The particular quality of her speech, the resonant depth of it, the frequency beneath it that had made every surface in the spire vibrate slightly, reduced to the scale of a small speaker, carried on the moving car into the dark of the forest's upper reaches, diminished, distorted by the playback system, and still unmistakably hers. Director Prim turned. He located the sound in the dark above the carnival with the speed of a thing that had been listening for exactly that sound for longer than I had been alive. His inverted head tracked the car as it moved along the cable line, up into the canopy, the camera's light now visible through the leaves as a moving point in the manufactured sky. He jumped. The distance between the carnival ground and the cable line was not a distance that anything should be able to cover from a standing position. He covered it. His hands found the cable car as it moved, found the door of it, found the door's edges, and what he did to the door of it in the next 4 seconds was not opening. It was a force applied to something he intended to be open that did not care about the mechanism by which it opened. The cable line registered the force, all of it. Every car on both lines registered it simultaneously, the vibration running along the cable from the point of impact in both directions at once, reaching each car's connection point and finding, in connection points that had been under tension for 60 years with no maintenance, the exact conditions required to fail. The first car fell from the near line, crashing through the canopy into the undergrowth below. The second followed, then 3 more, in rapid succession, each impact in the forest compressing the dark with a sound that was felt as much as heard. The car Director Prim had attached himself to fell. It did not fall quietly. It fell with the full weight of a cable car and the additional force of 60 years of structural integrity giving out at every connection point simultaneously, and it went through the canopy at the far end of the line and into the forest below, and the sound of it was the sound of something that had been trying to fly for a moment and had remembered that it could not. The remaining cars fell in sequence over the next 12 seconds. The carnival strings swung in the disturbance of their passing. The cable itself, freed of its load, relaxed onto the pylons and hung slack, and the pylons held, but they held differently now, the way something holds when it has been fully tested and found to be at its limit. Then the forest was quiet. Darius and I were at the boarding station's edge, looking into the trees where the car had gone down. The carnival lights continued behind us. The manufactured moon continued above. The string bulb swung in the last of the disturbance's air and then settled. Nothing moved in the forest. The silence lasted, and then, from somewhere very deep within the trees, deep enough that the moonlight did not reach it, deep enough that the forest's undergrowth was between us and it in uncountable layers, a sound came back. It was not a mechanical sound. It was not the sound of a manager unit's components, or the sound of the facility's infrastructure operating, or anything I had heard in any of our visits to this place. It was a call, of the kind that carries through undergrowth because it does not need to be loud to be carried, the deep register of something large, something whose presence in a space announces itself not with volume but with the quality of the silence it creates around it. Thorne. I understood it immediately, the way you sometimes understand things you have never heard before. The sound came from the forest, and it found every part of me that was still measuring threat and told that part, clearly and without ambiguity, that the scale it had been using was wrong. Darius stood very still. I stood very still. We looked into the trees where the cable car had fallen, where Director Prim had gone down with it, where the sound had come from in the depths beyond that. The cable car system was gone. The path that Director Prim had brought us to this forest to take, up through the canopy, through the cable car tour, to the upper station and the path beyond it, that led to the chamber where Caleb was most likely being kept, was gone. Crashed into the forest. The pylons still stood, the cables still hung slack between them, but the machinery that would have carried us along them, the cars that had been the route, were in the undergrowth among the trees. Among the trees where Thorne had just woken up. I looked at Darius, he looked at me. Somewhere above us, through the collapsed wall of the Carousel District, through the 10th chamber and the 9th and the arrow drawn in the dust by a hand I recognized, somewhere further in the chamber that Madame Lullabelle had claimed beyond her domain, Caleb was there, and the path to him had just fallen into the forest. And in the forest's deep dark, the thing that had destroyed Evermother, the thing that had started all of this, the thing that we had heard in the facility's records and the Dodd letters and the session files, without ever having to think about what it might mean to be in the same space as it, that thing was awake, the call did not repeat. That was somehow worse.
I kept my voice where the light could stay, counted the steps so I wouldn't stray, held every thought in a careful line, told myself all of this was mine. But something hums where the walls go thin, soft like a voice that I've always been, calling me back through the hollow seam, telling me I was never me. Did you hear it say my name? Or did I forget the same? If I answer, will I stay or drift somewhere it wants me to? I don't know where I begin. I don't know what I've let in. Every step feels borrowed skin. Something underneath my ribs is listening. Hands that move but don't feel mine, eyes that linger half a time, every shadow shaped like me, every silence answering rim, stay. You came back like you stayed out. I don't know where I begin. I don't know what I've let in. Every breath is wearing thin. Something underneath my ribs is opening. If I stop,
If tonight's story stayed with you, become part of the Pink Collective by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, Pink Collective, stay curious, stay safe, and stay pink.